Well, welcome and thank you. So my name's Adam Polczyk, that's me. A huge thank you to Aginext for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about what I've been doing, and an enormous thank you to you all for coming along to listen. I've been in commercial software development for more than 25 years now. Started as a programmer, still a programmer. For the last 15 years or so I've been an Agile practitioner, Scrum Master, Agile coach, that kind of thing. But for the last 3 years I've had a special interest, and that is all around feedback. How members of teams, particularly Agile teams was my initial interest, how we can get feedback. I think that feedback is really helpful to us. It's certainly been helpful to me in my career, helpful to us individually, and also helpful to us from a team point of view. If we care about the performance of our team, then feedback and being able to exchange feedback within the team is a really, I think, a necessary thing if we're to continue to be happy, healthy, performant teams. I think also it's an area that's been kind of a bit overlooked by the Agile community. I think there are some questions around it that haven't really been answered satisfactorily. The traditional approach to feedback, i.e. the annual performance review, is a bit sucky. It is not terribly effective, and it's particularly not very effective for an Agile way of working in Agile teams. So what I'm going to share over the next 40 minutes or so is the experiments that I've been doing over the last couple of years, what I think I've learned. My sincere hope is that this will give you some thoughts and some ideas, maybe see what's not so great about the traditional approach, and as I say, maybe give you some ideas for things to try in your situation, in your environments. Okay, sound good? Yep. Yay, okay. After lunch, it's after lunch, okay. So let's start then by just summarising what I'm talking about when I say the traditional approach to feedback. I think it can be pretty much summed up by this picture. Traditionally, in traditional organisations, what happens is one individual is given the responsibility for the performance of a group of people. This person is typically called a line manager, and they are the sole source of the feedback. And there we can see it coming down to these people. And because this, the giving of feedback is generally tied to the organisation's reward system, it's generally quite a heavy process. So I'm talking about the 6 monthly, once yearly performance appraisal type process. Hands up if you participate in an annual performance process, or have done, you know. Yeah, okay. All right. So, well, while we've got your hands up, keep your hands up if you feel that was a positive and worthwhile thing for you. Okay. Yeah. Some staying up. That's good. I'm glad to see some hands staying up. My experience is that it very much depends on the diligence and the competence of this individual. Some line managers I've worked with take this very seriously and do a great job of it. Others less so. One of the potential issues, though, with any situation where you've got one person doing something like this is, as human beings, we're all prone to bias. If you look on Wikipedia or anywhere else online, you'll easily find a list of more than 100 cognitive biases. So it's impossible for us as human beings to be objective. I like some people more than I like other people, and that will influence my perception of that person. This person will have exactly that challenge with these people. Now, there are some other questions here that I kind of have, which is, well, as Agilists, we understand the value of diverse teams. We want many perspectives, we want as much creativity happening as possible within the teams, and we certainly don't like situations where there's a single point of failure around people being directed in the work. So that's why we have self-organisation. But in this situation, there's no way for these people to exchange feedback with each other. This person might have an emotional intelligence quotient of 200. But in this situation, there's no way that the team can benefit from this person's insights or views. And also, this person has a fantastic impact actually on the productivity of this group of people. And yet, there's no way that this person can get feedback from these people, because these people are not in a safe place to be able to give that person candid feedback. Hopefully, of course, yeah, I've worked with people who have been very open and receptive, but that's just not always the case. This person may get feedback, but it will probably be from somebody off up here, and this situation here will look very different to the person up there than it does for these people down here. So that's been my general experience of feedback in a traditional system. There are all those problems around the effectiveness of this feedback, coupled to the fact that it's every 6 months to a year. You know, as Agilists, we value fast feedback and learning. Doesn't provide that. So I guess I'll sum up by saying I think there are 3 big challenges with the traditional approach, or questions. How can line managers, how can everyone in the team get feedback? How can these people exchange feedback with each other? And then what about self-organising teams where you don't have necessarily a team leader or a line manager in this picture? So what do team members do then? Because there isn't one person tasked with providing feedback. So those are the big challenges that have been driving me crazy over the last few years.
Can I add one more? Having been
Yeah.
developer, Scrum Master and now CTO, the other thing is most line managers really, really, really hate it. When you've got like a team of 6 or 7 people, trying to do all those in a month, it's a huge drain. We gather some feedback from people, that makes it worse. I've got like 21 bits of feedback for 17 members, and it's horrific.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know if anyone else has had that experience as well, but particularly around appraisal time, it's a huge amount of work for this individual. And my experience, all the people I've spoken to about this stuff, and the best, the best line managers who I've known and had and worked with, they find this a very stressful situation to be in, because it's, well, hold on, I'm just some guy, I don't know what to say necessarily to all of these people, and I feel like I'm judging them, and I'm uncomfortable with that because I'm a normal human being. The best ones. So, yeah, it's very stressful for this person as well, and a lot of work. So, the better way. But of course, we're Agilists, so we know there's no such thing as the better way. It's a better way, because there are any number of better ways. So this is a better way, maybe, depending on your context, depending on the situation. So, just checking the time, how are we doing? Yeah, good. So about, more than 3 years ago now, actually, when this began for me, this began totally by accident. I was in an organisation beginning its agile or transition to a more agile way of working, and they were very siloed. They had a BA team, a bunch of development teams, a test team, and a couple of guys who did the deployment, the kind of thing. And what we did was, one of the first things we did was got in there, shook it all up, and reshaped the teams into a number of cross-functional, self-organising teams. Yeah, absolutely. It was done to them, but it's working great, and it was a good thing to do. But immediately, or soon after doing that, it became apparent to people that the line managers in that organisation, so for example, the lead BA, the person who was being a line manager for the BA team, he now had, in this case was a he now had little visibility of all of these people. He still had this line management relationship, with those people, and the organisation, relatively small organisation, wanted to retain those relationships because they were long established and effective. But he now had very little visibility of what most of these people were doing on a day-to-day basis. So it made the one-to-one, monthly one-to-ones actually quite challenging. It's like, well, what have you been doing? So it was hard for the line managers to support their people as they needed to do. So this needed some kind of a solution, and what happened was I got together with the HR director and also the developments manager, and together we kind of had an idea for an experiment, something to try. And it was basically this, best thought of as a lightweight team-oriented peer feedback approach. We identified a bunch of competencies, you'll see those in a minute, and this was us just thinking about stuff that we thought was relevant to these cross-functional teams. We asked everyone in the team to exchange these indicative competency ratings with each other. Now, I say asked, I'll be totally honest with you, these people weren't asked, they were kind of asked, but I think it was clear that they didn't have much choice in this because that was just, you know, the culture of that firm at that time. I'm just being honest with you about the way this happened. But the teams did this, and I was included in this. I was part of the 2 teams that were beginning this thing. The information went off to HR. HR produced a chart. The chart was given back to the individual, and they'd just take it with them for their monthly one-to-one to talk about. Here's one of the first charts we produced. This is actually my one. So from my team, you can see, I'm gonna go around this side. You can see the competencies around the outside. Here we've got, so it's just very simple, min, max, average in green, and a self-rating in blue. Sorry, I'm in your way. There you go. And let's see what it says. So let's start here. So it's saying, okay, looking at the green, great, I'm kind of moderately technically curious, fairly respectful, reasonable communicator, collaborative, committed to the team, and quality driven. Oh, and solutions oriented. Great. And I was genuinely really happy to receive this from the team. This is what the team, you know, their appraisal of me. And it meant a lot to me to kind of get this and to know. So it was very reassuring because you never quite know. So it was good to get. Now, the observant of you will have noticed that it gets a bit funky here around business domain knowledge. And I got this, and I asked the team, so what if anyone can give me some insight as to what's happening here, I'd appreciate that. And the team were very ready to tell me that, business domain knowledge, we work in the insurance software domain, and Adam, you know nothing about insurance software, which was absolutely correct. Other people said, well, we know you know nothing about insurance or insurance software. Your domain as our Agilist and Scrum Master is, well, Agile and Scrum, so they kind of rated me accordingly, hence the spread. But what this really illustrated is that for this approach to work, everyone on the team needs to have a really good appreciation or common understanding of what these competencies mean and what great behaviours around these competencies look like. So that started to give an indication that actually there was quite a bit of value in this approach around, you know, just people getting a sense of where they're at with these competencies. It's actually a good way of having that whole conversation and beginning a dialogue of understanding, converging on a common understanding of what these things mean. Okay, good? All good? All with me? Good. All right, so what else did we find? So the great news was that all this effort, these charts were actually quite useful to people. Because they were quick and easy, you know, nice and light, took about 15 minutes for each of the team members to kind of do this thing. So it was easy, so they liked that. And they were all kind of curious, just as I was. We were all kind of curious to know how we were perceived by a team. I'm going to come over here. The next interesting thing, oh yes, and it did in fact improve the quality of the one-to-one interactions. The individual, the line manager had something a bit more kind of tangible to talk through in their one-to-ones. But the interesting thing was it actually changed the dynamic of that discussion. It was less about, well, this is what I think, this is what I observe, you know, the sort of assessment or judgment, and it became more, well, this is what the team is saying, what do we think that could mean, what do you want to do about it, and how can I help? You know, I'm not saying that in all cases all of the line managers took that view, but certainly some of them did. They found it a much less kind of stressful position to be in, and a much more supportive. It put them in a more supportive role rather than a judgmental one. It was generally acknowledged that people liked that everyone in the team was being treated the same. So it wasn't this thing where, you know, this person gives me feedback, I don't get to give them feedback, and they don't get, you know, any discussion around, you know, the realities of being in the team. No. It's, well, everyone is participating in this. And that was noted. We even had one situation where in the team I was in, one of the founders, the application director of the firm, was acting as product owner in that team at the time. And also in the team was one of the most junior members of the firm, just joined from college. And the two were exchanging feedback on each other. And they were really happy about that, because they, you know, it was, people could see that actually we value, you know, everyone's opinion is valued. And they were very pleased to do it. But well, as well as that, it was noted by the rest of the team and the rest of the firm that that level of openness around the stuff was there. Very positive stuff. Oh, so as I mentioned, it was a great way of communicating, you know, desired or you know, positive competencies. And this came as a bit of a surprise. My starting point was that everyone hates feedback, and back then I was, you know, not somebody who was particularly fond of feedback. And again, don't get me wrong, you know, I still don't consider myself to be any kind of great expert in the giving of feedback or receiving it. I still find it as much of a challenge as anyone else. But what I have managed to do through this exercise is come to terms with it as something that I understand is valuable to me, and maybe have got a few tools that help me to both give and receive the feedback, which I'll get to and we'll share. But interestingly, people wanted more of it. And the example of that is when I saw my chart, the first thing I thought was, well, what does this mean? So when those things occur, when somebody was given an indicative rating that was a bit below their self-rating or their expectation, they quite naturally wanted to know why, and ideally what they could do about it. So this was the next piece. And for the next piece, we turn to the work of this man here. So hands up if you've heard of Nonviolent Communication and Marshall Rosenberg. Only a couple of, oh, okay, that's great, thank you. Always pleases me to see some hands go up. Oh, sorry? Oh, okay, cool. Well, this is a big idea. And I've kind of drawn on this for inspiration for how people exchange feedback. But this is a big thing. Highly, you know, recommend taking a look at this. It's a big idea. Too big for now. But this is where this stuff came from. I didn't think of this myself. It was apparent to me that even the word feedback is a kind of problematic for a lot of people. A lot of people have had such bad experiences with receiving, you know, constructive criticism, should we say, particularly in this quite stressful performance review type situation, that even the mention of the word, you know, frightens people. Traditionally, we'll talk about, you know, positive feedback. Where there's positive, there must be negative feedback and criticism. I don't care how constructive the criticism may be. If you're seeking to influence somebody's behaviour for the better, if you're beginning the conversation with these kinds of terms, you're making an obstacle for yourself, I believe. Now, an idea from nonviolent communication is that Marshall Rosenberg said that when you break it down, all communication is fundamentally just one of two things. We're either saying thank you or please. We're expressing gratitude for the thing that somebody is doing that is meeting a need within us, yeah, whatever it may be, or we're making a request. We're asking somebody to at least consider an alternative way of behaving that may meet a need within us that is not being met. Yeah? And that need could be for their well-being. You know, it's not entirely a selfish thing. So, thank you and please. And if we apply this to this area of feedback, what I would previously have called positive feedback, I now see as expressing gratitude and I might do it with a recognition, an appreciation, or a commendation, or a kudos card. Management 3.0 kudos card. That's another way of just saying thank you. Then when it comes to what I would previously have called negative feedback, I see it now as making a request where I'm asking somebody, I'm making a suggestion or a recommendation that somebody at least consider a different way of being. So for me, the words are better and more positive, and it means I don't have to talk in terms of feedback, positive or negative. That's all just, I don't need to go there. But more than that, it kind of gives feedback a different meaning. Yeah, it's not me saying, "Hey Adam, you're not very good at this." Just thought you should know. Don't know what you do about it, but you're just okay. There you go. I hope that was useful. It's saying, well, actually, unless I can come up with a suggestion as to how an actionable suggestion about how they might be better at something, you know what? I'm probably going to not say anything, because it would do more harm than good. That's what I've arrived at personally now. You might not agree with that, but that's where I think I'm at with it. Okay, let's have an example. Really, really simple example for the commendations, the gratitude. This is just about clarity. I really like your positivity and focus. I like this because it helps the team push through tough challenges. And an example of this was when we were struggling, So nice and simple, it's all just about clarity. So if I receive this, I would think this person's really thought about this. They're not just saying, thanks, or you rock, or you're great, or I like your positive and focus. They're giving me more information to really help me understand. Now, when it comes to recommendations, so this is a bit that could be more challenging. But I'm going to talk you through an example. This is a real example from my past. So here's the form of it. Let's have a look at this. So I am noticing that you speak over me when we meet with senior stakeholders. For example, in the review, when I was asked to explain how we fixed a protocol issue. Okay. This makes me feel frustrated, as I have a need for my contribution to be recognised and appreciated. Okay. From now on, it would really help if you would wait for me to finish speaking before adding your view. This would show me that you really value my contribution and are happy for me to receive credit for it. So, okay, let's break this down a bit. So, this is a simplified form of what's called a nonviolent communication request, right? I just simplified some things to make it a bit more accessible to people. But essentially what we've got up here, the I'm noticing, these are the observations, and this is purely what the other person is saying or doing, without any judgment, without any diagnosis or interpretation, just the behaviours, and that's very important, okay? This is what they're saying and doing. Now this part here, the feeling that is created in me when the other person demonstrates this behaviour. The intention here, an idea from nonviolent communication, is that as human beings we're all capable of compassion, and I believe that's true. But it's if we can understand and and share the emotion that somebody else's behaviour creates within me, then we are creating a situation where there is the opportunity for them to show compassion to us. Apart from that, it's just useful information as well, because a lot of the times we're doing things and actually we're unaware of the kind of, sometimes strong emotions, frustrations that what we're doing is creating in the other person. And if we just knew, actually that's all we would need to know to go, oh, goodness, right, okay, yes, how can I change that? Then the last part, the request. The important thing about this is that it's an actionable request. So it's expressed as a positive action, something the other person could actually do, as opposed to asking somebody not to do something or to stop doing something. if we do that, we're not being clear actually about what we would like them to do or like them to consider doing. And also generally, when people are told not to do things, I don't know about you, but I kind of get quite defensive. Don't do that. You tell me what not to do. So there it is. This is that's the thinking behind this form. In about 15 years ago when I was in this situation, sadly, I didn't know anything about nonviolent communication. I didn't have this tool. And what happened was my frustration at this person's behaviour boiled over in the meeting with the senior stakeholders, and I gave this request in a way that was much less polite and reasonable than was here, and it was a disaster. It was a nightmare that still makes me kind of cringe, not whinge, maybe whinge as well. So, but I'm absolutely sure that had I known about this stuff back then, had I thought about it in this way, I would have been much more confident to and ready to give this feedback, to give this information, make this request to that person in a much better situation where they might have been receptive to it. And I think there's a good chance that our working relationship around this would have been much better and better for the team as well. Okay, so there you go. Hope that was interesting. Now, oh, please, yes.
Ideally face-to-face as well? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. So the real skill, the hard bit I feel about nonviolent communication, it's a beautiful idea and helpful at so many levels, but it's hard. And it takes it's a practical skill that requires practice. If you look online, you might find an MVC practice groups. A long-term goal of mine is to, when I know where I'm going to be for a length of time, is to create an MVC practice group. That's something I really want to do. But I found it still very valuable in offline situations and in reflection with other people and situations that have left me with negative feelings. Yes, that's a very good point. Okay, now then, yeah, good. So this is this is interesting. I wanted to share this with you. I encountered this piece of research, I don't know, 6-8 months ago, something like that, and it really spoke to me. I think anyone who is in a team, hands up if you're in a team. We're all in a team. I'm in 2 teams at the moment. It's weird. Okay, so most of us are in teams. Anyone who's in a team and cares about the performance of their team might find this really interesting. I would argue that if you don't care about the performance of your team, then you're probably not actually in the team. But what Will and the team did was they looked at 3 different behaviours, which they characterised as the jerk, the slacker, and the depressive pessimist, which I don't know about you, but kind of speaks to me. And what they discovered was they looked at the impact on the performance of teams of the presence of just one of those behaviours. And what they found was that where those behaviours were present, there was a 30 to 40% reduction in the productivity of the team. And this is kind of interesting because it's disproportionate. Only one person of maybe a team of 7 or 9 people having that kind of impact. The reasons for this, maybe that's not too surprising. In my experience, this wasn't terribly surprising. But the reasons for it were interesting. And it was that, firstly, some of these behaviours were contagious. If one person starts slacking off, other people might. If somebody is behaving like a jerk, other people might encourage other people to do that. So there's the question of, or the observation of contagious behaviours magnifying this. And the other one was that actually if somebody's behaving like a bit of a jerk, sometimes you get a situation where people de-identify from the group. They don't want to be part of a team or a social group where somebody's behaving in a way that they don't respect. So it's the contagion that was sort of the cause of this. Now, this kind of tallied quite a bit with my experience. My experience is that most of the time, most teams are absolutely fine. Whatever little issues we have, we sort them out through the work, we bond, we gel, we learn to work with each other, and mostly it's all good. But from time to time, I'll work with a team where there's serious conflict, interpersonal issues between people in the team. And what this says to me is that it's really important that, you know, as Scrum Masters, as Agile coaches, as people in teams, this is something we kind of want to have an eye on, understand and be aware of. And it's actually the case that the good news is that team members can positively influence these situations when they occur, but the only tool we've got to do that in the first instance is by making people aware of their behaviours and their competencies, and the way we do that is through feedback. So when I encountered this bit of research, I really, I thought, yeah, this kind of impressed upon me the importance of having the skill and the tools around this stuff. Okay, so all of these ideas started to come together, these little ideas, these little pieces started to come together into a bigger idea. If you recall, I characterised the traditional approach to feedback as looking something like this, and you kind of more or less agreed. I think that's, you know, had been your general experience of it. But what I realised we had was something that was quite different. Now we had a situation where everyone in the team was exchanging feedback, so feedback was flowing regularly in all directions. Because it was lightweight, it could happen much more frequently. Teams doing this monthly is a bit too frequently, but 6 weekly, 2 monthly seems to work pretty well. And because of the nature of the verbal feedback, using nonviolent communication as a form for the verbal communication, it's much more meaningful. So feedback in all directions, everyone being treated equally, respectfully, lightweight, so it can happen more frequently, and the nature of it being just much more frequent and meaningful, so faster feedback and learning around this stuff. I realised that basically what this was a more agile approach to feedback, and it raised an interesting possibility that actually this would work for a self-organising team. So now maybe if they don't actually need one individual who is responsible for doing their feedback, maybe actually feedback can become a team responsibility in the way that, say, quality is a team responsibility. So I thought about this some more, and as Agilists tend to do, we really like values and principles. And to help me kind of make sense of this stuff, I produced this. So some core values for any approach to team feedback. I would propose these as some values and some principles. First one is respect. Respecting people, primary, you know, lean value, and something that I feel is totally missing from the traditional approach to performance feedback, performance reviews, and so on. Individual development has to be all about giving the individuals information and tools that help them to improve and grow professionally and personally. And then lastly, team performance. Okay, so let's quick look at all of these. So when I talk about respect, being treated equally, you know, I want to be treated fairly equally. When it comes, all the questions or the decisions around this being through team agreement, the competencies that we care about, the frequency with which we're going to do this, and also the conversations we're going to have around the feedback that we've given each other. Establishing all that through team agreement up front. I said at the start, when we did this first time round, we imposed it on people. Don't do that now. What we do now is a nice little workshop where we say, what do we care about? And what does our feedback process look like in this team? And it works much better because people shape the thing, they own it, and they do it. Yes?
Quick question on that. So you've got the 8 competencies. So you
Okay.
initially imposed it, now they kind of self-organise it around that.
Yep.
So it sounds like you don't have the same competencies throughout each team.
Nope.
Do you find that are you more self-organising around your feedback now, or is it still like one person still reviewing most of the feedback?
It depends. The different organisations are trying this approach and using it in different ways. So, yeah, absolutely. At the beginning, or what some teams do, what I've done with teams is the team has a discussion about the competencies that matter to the team.
Yeah.
and use those and adapt those as they go. Other organisations where there's already a corporate competency model, well, actually, even in those ones, what they've done is given the team some flexibility about the ones that are appropriate to them. One team has gone even further. I might mention it a bit later, but mention it now. Gone even further, and they've selected their own kind of corporate competencies. They're sort of the fluffy things, or courage, openness, whatever, those kinds of things. Get it done. And they've also created an entirely separate functional or technical competency model. This was entirely their own creation. Front end, back end, database stuff, quality and so on, so that they could, and that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to have it. So
More based on the team's context.
absolutely, yeah.
Who they are as people and their team.
Absolutely, and where their team is right now, because obviously as they improve with one area that they think is, they might want different competencies 6 months from now.
I guess my question being around like how the people, if there's still other people still reviewing that feedback with them, how they're finding and reviewing many different types of feedback from many different sources, many different definitions. Just how
Okay.
interested.
Yeah, so again, it depends. Some organisations, they're saying, well, we've got this corporate competency model and review process, and it doesn't seem to work for these agile teams. So they give a degree of flexibility, or there are varying degrees of flexibility. So in some places it's more kind of imposed still. Just depends on the culture of the firm. Other places it's all totally open, and teams are just using it in parallel with their established performance management system. It's just something they do separately, quietly, because they believe it helps them as a team. Okay. Ownership's really important, because people need to own their feedback and have it be confidential to them. I think that's a really important thing. If they're going to share it in the conversation, then there's a team agreement about, we're going to talk about the sharing that we're going to do and who that sharing is with and why we are doing it. So it's not like this stuff goes off to HR or somewhere else in the organisation and gets used for whatever it gets used for without any knowledge of what's happening. So this is an important thing. Okay, moving on then. So an individual development happens, what we're trying to do is to raise competency and behavioural awareness. We do this through meaningful feedback that's frequent, confidential, and possibly, where it needs to be, anonymous. I know this is like, ooh, but if it's the difference between, say, for example, that line manager getting helpful feedback on their behaviours or not, and the impact that could have on the team, then if we're going to create a safe place where the individuals can provide that feedback, then the option of anonymity would need to be there. And lastly, again, the development happens through face-to-face conversation, through talking this stuff through with whether you'd agree to your line manager, maybe the organisation can provide a development coach, somebody in HR who's doing this, whatever it may be, whatever the options are, and that depends on what the firm can do. Then lastly, team performance. So this is about making the competencies visible to everyone in the team in an appropriate way so they can have team discussions as appropriate, and then off the back of that, this all becoming the potential for this to become a team responsibility. Okay, here's an example of what I mean by that. So this is a view that we've created for the teams. What does it say? So only the team can see this. It's strictly anonymised, so it's about the competencies of the team, not the people. Okay. Each cell is coloured. It represents. So there are 4 members in this team. 1, 2, 3, 4, and each cell is coloured by the competency, the median competency from the team for that individual. Basically, it's the team health at a glance. So the more green it is, the more competent the team. The key thing to note, I'm in the way again, columns are not people. This is not one person. Okay? The the ratings are ordered. So that could be one person. Does that make sense? So what this means is that, okay, you know, your eyes will have been drawn to this. Respect, red. Oh, what's going on in this team? Well, it could be that actually the person, and by the way, this is fabricated data, but it's inspired by absolutely a real situation. Okay. So, and it could well be that the person for whom there is an opportunity for development in the area of respect and behaviours around that is also the team's most recognised by the team as the most courageous person on the team. They are the most committed to the team and the work, and they're the most focused on the work and the goals of the team. And in all these other areas, actually, they're pretty solid. And some people are saying, "Oh, I know that person." No, maybe I don't know. So you see, what I'm trying to say here is that this is visible to the team, it's visible to this individual, it's visible to everyone else. Of course, everyone else is on the team. They already know this is going on. The only thing that's different is everyone on the team knows it's visible to everyone else on the team. If this were me, I would not be in a position, I would feel I wasn't able to ignore this. Now, and from a team point of view, if the team can support this person to improve in this area, then it's a great opportunity for the improvement of that team. Okay, is that anything freaky or frightening about or worrying about that just yet? Okay, good. Okay, so I've mentioned I've been doing this for a few years. So far, a bunch of people have found it, and I haven't done much kind of talking about it, but or promotion of it, but a few people have found it and started using it, mostly in the UK. I've got people in the early adopters in the UK I can speak to and learn from, and that's great. People who are a bit more remote, it's kind of harder. Generally, it's software teams, but I have a whole HR team use it, a media team, and I've actually got some wonderful German people are trying it, and it looks to me like they service Rolls-Royce jet aircraft engines, so that'll be an interesting one. So not necessarily IT. Lots of data collected now. I look at the commendations and the recommendations that I come through, and there's some really beautiful things that people are saying to each other. So what I like to do, just go through these from time to time. I'm the only person who can see these. I read those and I think, yeah, this is a worthwhile thing to be doing, because actually it's given the opportunity for people to say some great stuff, exchange great stuff with each other, which I know they otherwise probably wouldn't. I've had some good outcomes. Again, this is from the people local to me who I've been able to actually speak to the most. As I've mentioned, teams creating their own competency models and using those. So really owning that process. A really great story where long-standing interpersonal conflict between two senior people in a team, the team, having to tiptoe around this situation for 2 years. This approach gave them the opportunity to communicate in a way that they hadn't done previously, and now one of them is inviting the other one to their 30th wedding anniversary party. It's kind of been fixed to that degree. So, I don't know, again, worth it just for that in my book. And yeah, some deeper insights for line managers. So an ex-colleague of mine used it this is an investment banking situation, 2 teams. He's managing both teams. One of them was his kind of original team, and they provided him with ratings that were, good and positive. And then a team he had been assigned gave him noticeably lower ratings for these competencies. And he realised he kind of understood, or believed he understood exactly why that was, and realised that he needed to be giving these people some more support and love, basically. And he said to me that not only was that good to know, but well, very important to know and something he could easily resolve, but he couldn't think of any other way that he could have discovered that. So, all good stuff. I try and get feedback. It's really hard, but I try and get feedback from the users on how they're finding this thing. I issue out a user survey asking questions like this. This is one of the, so from about of those early adopters, this is from 25 responses, generally speaking, so some people didn't know. How helpful do you think this approach could be in improving the effectiveness of your team? Some people didn't know, some people thought it wasn't helpful to them. The vast majority thought it was helpful or very helpful. Yo.
What did the people say was unhelpful?
Good question. It's hard to know because even though each field in the survey had a kind of free-form comment field, not everyone provided it. I think it was more that to some, if somebody says, you get your feedback and it just says, yeah, you're all right, you're great. Then it's like, oh, okay, well, I kind of knew that already, so that wasn't terribly helpful. So it was mostly that kind of thing. It's just that the information for some people, I think, didn't really yield anything that was, immediately useful to them. There was nothing in the free-form comments that made me think, oh, hold on. There's something, yeah. Absolutely, I've been so wary about there being anything potentially dangerous in doing this. It's felt like quite a risky business at times. But the other responses I've had is that the vast majority of people find this overriding reassuring. That's what most people find the responses, just as I did. And that's a positive thing, I think, because there isn't enough feedback for people in the workplace. So great, that's enough of that. And so Aginext, the future. So here's an idea. This is a possibility that I've been putting around for something that could flow very naturally from the data. Okay, how am I doing for time? Am I like way over? Am I good? When does this end? Does anyone know where this ends? Oh shit, okay, all right, let's keep going. Right, so just quickly an idea. If you've got many or where there are many teams using this, it would be really easy to aggregate these kind of ratings to create basically a profile of an organisation in a way that isn't going to create any freaky competitive behaviours. So here we go. So it's aggregated across the teams. Each plot is a competency and a mean and a distribution. Together they make a profile, and this has the potential really to make a firm's culture measurable and visible. So if you're somebody doing cultural initiatives, then maybe this is a way of seeing if they're being effective or not. Anyway, very all experimental that. So yeah, I started out on this journey totally by accident, and then realizing that what I wanted was an approach for agile teams to be able to exchange feedback. What I've ended up arriving at is actually an agile approach for any team to exchange feedback. I believe it's a better fit for self-organising and traditional teams alike. In traditional teams, it's really useful as a way for line managers to get feedback as well as not be the central point of failure for everyone else's feedback, potentially. For all your change agents out there as well, it's a really it's a way to start engaging with HR, or talent and culture, as it's typically being called now, around this whole area of Agile across the organisation. We're past the point now of Agile being something that just a development organisation does. But if we're to engage with HR, then we kind of need some options. We need to understand what the challenges are and say, well, maybe this is a way forward, but maybe not. Because one size doesn't fit all. And as I said before, experiment, find an approach that is more likely to fit your organisation. If you've got very stable teams, then maybe this would work in your organisation. If you're continually shuffling teams around and moving people about, or have got lots and lots of shared people across teams, maybe this isn't going to work so well. And lastly, collaborators welcome. So this is an ongoing journey, an exploration. If you want to find out more and try this thing, then on this way of doing it, then more than happy to do what I can to support you in that. That's me. Thank you. So find more information there. There's a blog there, and that's me. Get in touch if you want to know any more or do anything with it. Thank you. Pleasure. And thank you.